Hi, I'm Chris Lebrecht, and this is a reading from Mark chapter 4. Jesus calms the storm. So we're in Mark chapter 4, and we're going to start at verse 35. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were other boats in there with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. Does it ever seem like Jesus is sleeping on you when you're in a storm and you need him? Felt like that for the disciples. They woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Other translations say, "Peace, be still." Then the wind died, and it was completely calm. All it took was a word from Jesus. He spoke everything into existence, and now here he is commanding what he created with his voice to be still by the sound of his voice. When the word Jesus, capital W, gives a word, everything has to obey. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Peace, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. There's a reading in the book of Isaiah that says that his word will not return to him void. Whatever it's sent here to accomplish, it will accomplish exactly that. And we see here that his word accomplished exactly what it was supposed to. He said to his disciples, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." A couple things I wanted to point out here. Sometimes following Jesus looks like him saying, "Hey, let's go do this," and you think you're just hanging out with Jesus. You think you're just going to a worship service or you're going to a Bible study, and he'll walk you right into a storm, and he'll do it himself, and he'll know what's coming, and he won't tell you. That's what happened with the disciples. They walked right into this thing. Jesus said to them, "Let's go to the other side." So they think they're getting in a boat just to go to the other side, and they had a mission we're going to talk about in a minute when they got to the other side. But they think, they're looking at where we're going, thinking that's all there is to it. But really, there was a lesson on the way. So this storm comes up, right? It's so crazy that it's about to take them under. They're about to die, they think. And Jesus is taking a nap. The peace of Christ is an unreasonable peace. In Philippians 4, 6 through 7, it says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything give thanks and make your petitions, with thanksgiving make your petitions known to God, and the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and your mind in Christ Jesus." It's a peace that surpasses understanding. So they're facing what looks like certain death, but Jesus is at such peace that he's sleeping. One lesson that Jesus wants us to know and wanted them to know from this is that when you're with Jesus, whether it's in a boat in a storm or whether you're in just your Christian walk, when you're in Christ, that peace that he has is for you to have. And no matter what you're going through, you can have peace through it. And he proves that right here by taking a nap. To them, it looked like he didn't care. But to him, it looked like they needed a lesson, I think, on how to trust God when you're in a real tough jam. One thing to point out here is Jesus didn't cause this storm, but he still created the elements that Satan used to produce this storm. He was still fully in control. This was his creation that was acting up the storm, the waves, the wind. He created all this, so he still had full authority. But sometimes it may not look like that because Satan is the small g god of this world, and he's got some power, and he likes to flex. But God reminded the waves that they were subject to his command. When he said, "Peace, be still," they had to listen. The reason the storm came up, which we're not going to really get too far into it tonight, but in the next chapter, we see why the storm came up. Sometimes Satan will create a storm when he knows you're on a mission with God to go and do something for the kingdom. Jesus was on his way to restore a man who was demon possessed, which I think we'll do another video on another time. But so he's on his way to cast demons out of this guy, and Satan doesn't want it. So Satan's throwing a storm to slow him down and to try to stop him. So two things. One thing is Satan will often throw a storm in your way when you're about to hit something big. When you're about to do something real big for the kingdom, something bad will usually come up before it. The good news is, the other takeaway is that he can only go as far as the Lord lets him. Kind of like when he tested Job. God only let Satan go so far with him, and then there was a point where he had to stop. So when Jesus is in the boat with you, he'll let you go through some rough waters, but remember, he's the one that has the final say. And as soon as he commands the waves and the winds to stop, they have to stop. So you can take away from this that you can still trust him, even when he leads you into something that makes you think you can't trust him. They said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" They accused him of not caring if they died. And oftentimes that's how we feel when the Lord makes us walk through something difficult and we want him to remove it right away. He'll test our faith in it first. And it's out of his love that he does that. One thing I wanted to point out here is that towards the end of this, he said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" So they have already seen enough of his miracles up until this point to know that this isn't something they really need to worry about. But that's often how it is with us. God gets us through all kinds of things. But then when we face something new, it looks scary and we forget how faithful he's been. But so they go from, and reasonably so, they were afraid. It looked like they were going to die by the way how bad the storm was. But I noticed something here. I read this a little differently this time. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And it says, they were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now, I'm not saying I'm speaking on absolute full authority here, and I'm certain about this, but when I read this, I don't think that they were still afraid of the storm. When they said, "Who is this?" It says, they were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." I don't think at this point they were terrified from the storm. I think now they had a reverential fear of the power of the word spoken by Jesus. They see this storm that they're terrified of. They're going to die. And Jesus speaks a word to that storm and it disappears. I think you can read this either way, but I think one way to read this is that they weren't terrified of the storm in this last verse here. I think they were shocked by his authority. I thought that was pretty cool, and I just wanted to point that out. Let me know what your take is on that in the comments. If you have an opinion on that, I'd love to hear it. All right, God bless you guys.